The year is 2005, and in the heart of Santa Clara, California, the sun never sets on the empire of Intel Corporation. The company is not merely a manufacturer of computer components. It is the industrial deity of the information age. For 3 decades, the rhythm of global progress has been set by the ticking of Intel's clock speeds. The partnership with Microsoft, the legendary Wintel alliance, has created a monopoly so complete that it defines the very concept of personal computing. If you own a laptop, a desktop, or a server anywhere on Earth, there is a 90% probability that the brain inside it was forged in an Intel fabrication plant. The atmosphere inside the Robert Noyce building, Intel's headquarters, is one of supreme, unshakable confidence. The company's CEO, Paul Otellini, presides over an organization that possesses the most advanced manufacturing technology in human history. They are the masters of Moore's Law, the observation that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles every 2 years. While competitors struggle to keep up, Intel operates with the precision of a metronome, executing a Tick-Tock strategy that delivers a new manufacturing process or a new architecture every 12 months. They are printing money. Their gross margins are the envy of the hardware world, hovering near 60%. They focus on high-performance chips, the core processors that burn hot, run fast, and cost hundreds of dollars apiece. In this world of high-margin dominance, the mobile phone is viewed as a distraction. It is a commodity device, a dumb terminal used for voice calls and text messages. The chips that power these phones are considered bottom-feeding scraps. They are low power, low cost, and low profit. Intel has dabbled in this market with a division called Exascale, based on the ARM architecture, but they have recently sold it off to Marvell Technology for $600 million. The logic is cold and hard. Why waste silicon capacity on a chip that sells for $10 when you can sell a Xeon server chip for $1,000? The culture of Intel is built around performance, not efficiency. It is built around the wall socket, not the battery. It is against this backdrop of immense success and strategic rigidity that a meeting takes place that will alter the trajectory of technology for the next half-century. It is a meeting between Paul Otellini and Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is in the midst of his second act at Apple. He has saved the company with the iPod, but he is paranoid. He knows that eventually a mobile phone will cannibalize the music player. He is secretly developing a device that combines a phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator. He calls it the iPhone. But to build it, he needs a brain. He needs a processor that is powerful enough to run a full operating system, OS X, but efficient enough not to melt the battery in an hour. Apple and Intel are currently in a honeymoon phase of their own. Just months earlier, Jobs had stood on stage and announced that Apple computers were switching from PowerPC chips to Intel processors. It was a massive coup for Otellini. Intel had finally captured the Mac. The relationship is warm. The trust is high. So naturally, Jobs comes to Intel first. He brings the concept of the iPhone to Otellini. He lays out the vision, a device that will be produced in massive volumes, tens of millions of units, requiring a custom silicon solution. Otellini is intrigued, but he is a businessman trained in the discipline of the spreadsheet. He asks for the numbers. Jobs is demanding. He wants a specific price point for the chip. He wants to pay roughly $10 per unit, and he wants Intel to commit massive R&D resources to customize their architecture for this device. Otellini takes the proposal back to his team. They run the analysis. They look at the die size, the physical area of the chip. They look at the manufacturing yield. They look at the development costs. And they look at the volume forecast. Apple, at this time, has 0 market share in mobile phones. They are a computer company entering a market dominated by Nokia, Motorola, and BlackBerry. The analysts at Intel plug the numbers into their models. The spreadsheet spits out a clear answer: no. The analysis suggests that the volume will never be high enough to recoup the investment. At $10 a chip, the margins would dilute Intel's earnings. It would require retooling factories designed for high-performance PC chips to make low-power phone chips. It contradicts the core strategy of the company. It is a bad deal. Otellini trusts the math. He trusts the forecast. He returns to Jobs and declines the offer. He tells Apple that Intel will pass on the iPhone. Jobs, undeterred, turns to Samsung. He licenses the architecture from a British design firm called ARM Holdings, the same architecture Intel had just discarded with the sale of Exascale, and asks Samsung to manufacture the chip. The decision is made. The iPhone will launch with an ARM-based brain, not an Intel x86 brain. At the time, in 2006, this decision barely registers as a footnote. The press doesn't know about it. The stock market doesn't care. Intel's stock is trading on the strength of its server monopoly and the booming sales of Windows PCs. The honeymoon period for Intel continues unabated. When the iPhone launches in June 2007, the tech critics focus on the lack of a keyboard and the slow 2G network. Intel executives look at the device and see a toy. It uses an underpowered processor. It can't run real software like Photoshop or Excel. It is a consumer gadget, not a computing platform. For the next 3 years, the illusion of correctness persists. Intel releases the Core i series, i3, i5, i7, which are masterpieces of engineering. They crush the competition from AMD. They dominate the data center. Revenue hits record highs. The netbook craze of 2008 gives Intel a false sense of security in the mobile space. They released the Atom processor, a stripped-down version of their PC chip, designed for small, cheap laptops. They believe that if mobile computing ever becomes serious, the market will naturally gravitate back to the x86 architecture, because that's where the software is. They believe that the laws of physics that apply to PCs, where power equals performance, will eventually apply to phones, but they are wrong. They are misjudging the fundamental shift in the nature of computing. The iPhone is not a smaller laptop, it is a new species. And it creates a tsunami that begins to wash away the foundations of the Wintel empire. The consequences of the decision begin to manifest with the launch of the App Store and the subsequent arrival of Android. Google, seeing the direction Apple is heading, acquires Android and releases it as an open operating system. Critically, Android is also built on the ARM architecture. Suddenly, the entire mobile industry coalesces around ARM. It becomes the standard. The ecosystem of developers starts writing code for ARM, optimizing their apps for the power-efficient instruction set that defines mobile. Intel is now on the outside looking in. The volume of chips being produced for smartphones explodes. We are moving from selling hundreds of millions of PCs a year to billions of smartphones a year. This volume drives a new kind of Moore's Law. Because companies like Apple, Samsung, and Qualcomm are making so many chips, they can afford to invest billions in improving the ARM designs. The performance gap between the toy chips and the real Intel chips begins to close at a terrifying rate. By 2011, the panic inside Santa Clara is palpable. The PC market begins to flatten. The smartphone market is rocketing vertically. Intel realizes they have missed the boat. They scramble to fix the mistake. They decide to force their way into the mobile market using the brute force of their balance sheet. They take the Atom processor and try to jam it into smartphones. But the x86 architecture carries the baggage of 40 years of legacy code. It is complex. It requires more transistors to do simple tasks than ARM. As a result, it runs hotter and uses more battery. To convince phone manufacturers to use these inferior chips, Intel launches a program that will go down in history as one of the most expensive corporate blunders of all time, the Contra Revenue strategy. Essentially, Intel pays the manufacturers to use their chips. They subsidize the cost of the motherboard, the testing, and the marketing. They are literally losing money on every single tablet and phone chip they ship just to buy market share. Between 2013 and 2014, the mobile division of Intel loses over $7 billion. It is a financial hemorrhage of epic proportions. Despite the billions spent, the market rejects the product. The battery life is never quite as good as the ARM competitors. The Android apps written for ARM have to be emulated on Intel chips, causing glitches and slowdowns. The OEMs, Asus, Lenovo, Dell, take the free money, build a few devices, and then abandon the platform as soon as the subsidies dry up. The Contra Revenue program is a failure, but the financial loss is only the tip of the iceberg. The true catastrophe is the loss of the process lead. For decades, Intel's power came from its factories, the fabs. Because they had the highest volume in the PC market, they could afford to build the most expensive factories, which gave them the best chips, which gave them the most money, which allowed them to build the next factory. It was a virtuous cycle. But when the mobile revolution happened without them, the volume shifted to Taiwan. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, was a foundry. They didn't design chips, they just manufactured them for others. Because Apple, Qualcomm, and Nvidia needed billions of chips for the mobile boom, they sent their orders to TSMC. This massive influx of cash and volume allowed TSMC to invest aggressively in new technology. They began to catch up to Intel. The virtuous cycle moved from Santa Clara to Hsinchu. The aftermath of the decision to reject the iPhone is fully realized in the late 2010s. The performance curves cross. The chips designed by Apple for the iPhone and iPad become so powerful that they rival the performance of Intel's desktop CPUs. Apple, ruthless and forward-thinking, realizes it no longer needs Intel for its Mac computers. In 2020, the final humiliation arrives. Apple announces the M1 chip. It is a desktop-class processor based on the ARM architecture, the direct lineage of the chip Steve Jobs wanted Intel to build in 2006. The M1 is faster, cooler, and more efficient than anything Intel has to offer. Apple dumps Intel. The partnership that Jobs and Otellini celebrated is over. Simultaneously, Intel's manufacturing dominance collapses. Due to a series of engineering delays and a lack of volume compared to the mobile market, Intel falls behind TSMC. For the first time in history, the best chips in the world are not made by Intel. They are made by a contract manufacturer in Asia. Intel is forced to admit defeat and begins outsourcing some of its own production to TSMC. The decision made in that meeting room in 2006 was not just about a single contract. It was a decision about the future of computing. Otellini looked at the iPhone and saw a low-margin phone. He failed to see a pocket computer that would become the primary device for the human species. By rejecting the iPhone, Intel rejected the mobile ecosystem. They denied themselves the volume required to maintain their manufacturing lead. They allowed an alternative architecture, RM, to grow from a niche player into a giant that would eventually threaten their core server business. The cost of this decision cannot be measured merely in the lost revenue from the iPhone chips, though that alone would be hundreds of billions of dollars. The cost is the loss of the mantle of leadership. Intel transitioned from being the undisputed driver of innovation to a legacy incumbent fighting for relevance. Paul Otellini, before he retired, admitted in a rare moment of candor that his gut told him to take the deal, but the spreadsheets told him to say no. He let the data of the past dictate the strategy for the future. He focused on the margin of the single chip rather than the value of the platform. The semiconductor industry is unforgiving. It requires betting billions of dollars today on a future that won't arrive for 5 years. When Intel said no to Steve Jobs, they didn't just lose a customer. They created their own executioner. They funded the rise of their rivals and starved their own future. The Intel Inside sticker, once a symbol of the future, became a mark of the past, stuck to the plastic casing of a PC in a world that had moved to glass. The irony is absolute. The spreadsheet that Otellini's team built was technically correct. In 2006, the iPhone chip would have been low margin. But spreadsheets are blind to paradigm shifts. They cannot calculate the value of an ecosystem. They cannot forecast a revolution. The decision saved Intel pennies in 2006 and cost them the world in 2020. The empire that Robert Noyce built, the company that put the silicon in Silicon Valley, found itself hollowed out not by a competitor's innovation, but by its own refusal to step into the unknown. To walk through the semiconductor landscape today is to see a world remade by that single no. The most valuable chip company in the world is now Nvidia, followed by TSMC. ARM designs are in everything from smartwatches to supercomputers. Intel is struggling to restructure, laying off thousands of employees and begging for government subsidies to build new factories. Factories that, had they taken the mobile wave, they might have been able to build with their own cash. The decision illustrates the ultimate trap of the incumbent. Success breeds a specific kind of blindness. When you are making 60% margins on high-end servers, It looks irrational to chase 10% margins on phones. It looks like bad business. But in technology, the low end always eats the high end. The toy always gets better faster than the tool. By the time Intel realized that the phone was actually a computer, the computer had already become a phone. The legacy of that meeting is a warning to every dominant corporation. The threat never looks like a threat at first. It looks like a distraction. It looks like a bad deal. And by the time you realize it's a threat, it's already too late to do anything but watch as the world you ruled is replaced by the world you rejected. The billions lost by Intel are a testament to the fact that the most expensive word in business is no. The decision effectively ended the Wintel-era and birthed the mobile era, leaving the king of the PC stranded on an island of its own making, watching the tide of history roll out, never to return. The specific tragedy of the Intel decision lies in the what if. If Intel had accepted the contract, the x86 architecture would likely have been adapted for mobile. The vast resources of Intel's manufacturing would have been applied to the iPhone. ARM might have remained a niche player for embedded devices. TSMC might never have achieved the scale to overtake American manufacturing. The entire geopolitical balance of the semiconductor supply chain, currently a flashpoint of global tension over Taiwan, would be different. The center of gravity for the digital world would have remained firmly in Santa Clara. But history does not care about what-ifs. It cares about what happened, and what happened was a triumph of short-term accounting over long-term vision. The analysts protected the quarterly earnings per share at the cost of the generational dominance. They saved the margin and lost the monopoly. As the years pass, the magnitude of the error only grows. The explosion of AI, the rise of edge computing, the proliferation of IoT, all of these are built on the foundations of the mobile ecosystem that Intel shunned. The data centers of today are increasingly being filled with ARM-based chips from Amazon and Ampere. The laptop market is seeing a resurgence of ARM through Windows on ARM and Apple's MacBooks. The walls are closing in from all sides. The Intel logo still spins in the commercials, and the famous chime still plays. But the sound rings different now. It is no longer the sound of the future arriving. It is the sound of a clock winding down. A reminder of a time when a company could be so powerful, so wealthy, and so confident that it felt it could afford to say no to the future. They were wrong. And the silence that follows is the sound of the billions that got away. The ultimate lesson of the Intel iPhone decision is that in the technology industry, paranoia is a survival trait, and comfort is a death sentence. Intel was comfortable. They were comfortable with their monopoly, comfortable with their margins, and comfortable with their roadmap. They forgot that the map is not the territory. When Steve Jobs walked into that office, he was offering them a new map. They looked at it, saw that it didn't match the old one, and threw it away. The world followed the new map, and Intel was left behind, navigating a world that no longer exists. This stands as the definitive case study of the innovator's dilemma. It wasn't incompetence that killed Intel's mobile ambitions, it was competence. They were too good at what they did. They were so efficient at making PC chips that they couldn't justify making anything else. The organizational antibodies attacked the new idea because it threatened the health of the old idea. The decision was rational, logical, and defensible by every metric taught in business school. And it was completely, catastrophically fatal. The decision that changed the chip industry forever was the decision to stay the same.